This video is sponsored by the Standoff, a 2-day Warhammer 40k GT held in Portland, Maine, with a special focus on hobby prizes and supporting the hobby community. More about them later on in the video. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to another episode of the best armies in 40k. As always in this series, we are going to be breaking down undefeated lists from GT and major level events from the past weekend. This one being for the weekend of November 4th and November 5th, 2023. And holy crap, have the results from this weekend been absolutely wild. Not only do we see some enormous results in large major level events from factions that I would not have expected, but we also saw potentially the most balanced metagame that I've probably ever seen in my time breaking down 40k stats. And this video is going to be wildly long because we have no less than 16 factions in the undefeated brackets of their respective tournaments. Absolutely wild. Last week we saw a little bit of a slow weekend for 40k tournaments. This week has been entirely different, however. We saw two large major level events, including the California Cup and Raccoon Rumble, occurred this weekend, as well as tons and tons of smaller GT level events, and we're going to be talking about all those results in this video. And as always, if you enjoy this Warhammer 40k coverage, you enjoy talking about lists and Warhammer 40k rules, please give a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, all the YouTube stuff, and let's dive into some lists. So, the breakdown for this week. We saw very few factions with more than one undefeated player. In fact, no one had more than two. Now, Aeldari topped the list here, continuing their dominance of the 40k metagame at the highest competitive levels, with two undefeated results at Raccoon Rumble and the Hobart GT. We see Orks actually with the exact same results in the same events. They also went undefeated at the Raccoon Rumble, which was so large that it did have multiple undefeated players. The California Cup, the other large major level event from this weekend, actually did go all the way to a single undefeated. So once we get to that spot, I'll mention some of the top players from that event, but we're not going to be going through all of their lists. Raccoon Rumble, however, still had 3 undefeated at the end. One of them was playing Orks. At the Hobart GT, we also saw an X0-1 Orc player who had ended the event with all wins and 1 draw. Astra Militarum actually coming out third here with 2 undefeated records, both at Hog Tower and the Conquest Mid-Season Warfare, which is a smaller event. Chaos Space Marines also did well, going undefeated at the Raccoon Rumble and Lightly Salted GT, where they went X0-1 with 1 draw on their record. To be fair, though, that draw was in the finals against Space Wolves. Moving on to factions with only 1 undefeated list so far, we have Death Guard at V is for Volkite, and then the winner of the California Cup. World Eaters went all the way at the California Cup, but we also saw strong showings from Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, with Chaos Space Marines making up 2 of the top 5, and Dark Angels making up the other 2. So a very power armor dominated metagame from California Cup. We then have Chaos Demons taking down the Final Stand Grand Tournament. Chaos Knights won the Atomic City Warzone. Adeptus Astartes won Flames of Autumn with an Ultramarines list. The Midmo Maelstrom was won by Dark Angels. Space Wolves went undefeated with an X01 record, as I mentioned before, at the Lightly Salted GT, where they tied against Chaos Space Marines in the finals, 53-53. Black Templars also took down the BolterCon GT. And moving on to Xenos factions, Necrons went undefeated X0-1 at Hog Tower. Tyranids also going undefeated at the Midmo Maelstrom with a wild list that I'm excited to talk about. Drukhari getting a win, with Scary from Scarredcast going 5-0 at the XPG. And last but certainly not least, Tau Empire also going undefeated at Atomic City Warzone. This video was sponsored by the Standoff. If you are one of the many thousands of players who were not lucky enough to be bestowed a golden ticket to the Warhammer World Championships November 18th and 19th, the Standoff is here for you. This is a long-running, ongoing event held this year in Portland, Maine. In the past, the event was a RTT style, but always drew big crowds and had a great showcase for not only great competitive play, community, but also a lot of hobby aspects, including hobby competitions and other satellite events. The event's been absolutely spectacular in the past. I still use some of their prize support as my mouse pad, and I'm excited for them to expand into a multi-day GT style event. The event will consist of a Warhammer 40k 2-day GT, as well as hobby competitions, including showcases for armies, individual models, and painted displays. So come down to the DoubleTree in Portland, Maine for 2 great days of Warhammer 40k gaming with awesome competition and a special focus on the hobby. There'll be more information and a Best Coast pairings link to the event down in the video description and pinned comment, and I'll see you at the crossroads. So let's jump in talking about some of these top factions and the lists that they brought. Now, there are so many lists to talk about in this event. I'm not going to go through each and every single one of them in painstaking detail, so this is going to be a bit of a rapid fire segment. The first one in Aeldari, the Masters of 10th Edition 40k so far, is Matthias Bellman at the Raccoon Rumble. Matthias was playing an Autarch Wayleaper, Fugan the Fire Lord, a Spirit Seer with Fate's Messenger, the Incarn, interestingly, a unit of 5 fire dragons to go with Fugan. Usually we see that guy by himself, but today we are bringing friends. 3 Night Spinners to add some indirect fire and board control, a unit of Rangers, 1 unit of Swooping Hawks for secondary objectives, 2 individual Warwalkers, and a Wraithguard unit. Ultimately, this is a pretty standard Eldar build. Oftentimes we are seeing the Wraithguard being swapped for an Avatar of Khaine, or the Incarn being swapped for an Avatar of Khaine. Between the Incarn, the Avatar, and the Wraithguard, those are kind of the modal sections of an Aeldari list. Otherwise, the Autarch Wayleaper characters and support, as well as the Night Spinners, are basically locked in to most Eldar armies. Moving on to Orks, we'll also stick with the Raccoon Rumble, with Max Cantor going 6-0 at the event. This list was running a Beast Boss, Ghazghkull Thraka himself, as well as Mad Doc Grotznik, 2 Knobs on Smash Squig, 1 equipped with Headwappa's Kill Choppa, as well as a War Boss with Follow Me Lads. Those guys were leading some Beast Snagga Boys, as well as 1 big unit of 20 boys, a single truck in the dedicated transport slot, alongside a battle wagon, 2 units of 10 Gretchen, 1 unit of 2 Mega Knobs to hang out with Ghazghkull, 2 big units of Swighog Boys to be led by those 2 Knobs on Smash Squigs, 2 units of 5 Storm Boys, and 2 units of 3 War Bikers. A lot of MSU energy in this army, not necessarily the big transport rush that we're normally seeing from Orc. And also we have that huge brick of boys to get a little bit of that Orc horde feel back. Definitely interesting. It's nice to see a little bit of innovation from Orcs who have been relatively stagnant over the last couple of weeks. Moving on to Astra Militarum, we'll talk about Lucas Duquesne's list, who went 5-0 at the Hog Tower event. The only 5-0 player at the event, although we did see an X-0-1 with a draw on their record. This list was running a Cadian Command Squad, Lord Solar Leontis, 1 Regimental Engine Seer, as well as a Tank Commander, 1 unit of 20 Cadian Shock Troopers, and a smaller 10-man Infantry Squad, 2 units of Armored Sentinels, not Scout Sentinels, interestingly, although we do also see 2 individual Scout Sentinels later on in the list. We have 1 Leman Russ Demolisher, as well as a unit of Tempestus Scions in order to add some utility. Those are being backed up by a Calidus Assassin, and all that is in support of, wait for it, a Bane Sword. For those who need a little bit of a memory jog, like myself, allegedly, the Bane Sword is the Quake Cannon equipped super heavy tank for Astra Militarum. This thing is a D6 plus 6 shot, strength 16, AP 4 damage weapon that triggers enemy deadly demises on a 3+ rather than a 6. This means that the Bane Sword can deal some additional AoE damage if it's targeting enemy units with deadly demise with that big cannon. If it does take out big things like knights or other super heavies, it could be potentially triggering very dangerous deadly demises very easily. Now moving on from the Imperial side of things over to Chaos, we can talk about Chaos Space Marines, who are continuing to do well. We've seen them with a lot of undefeated results over the last couple of weeks, and they still come in with 2 here. Manuel Weyand went undefeated at the event, 6-0 with Chaos Space Marines. This list was running 2 Chaos Lords, one of them with the Talisman of Burning Blood, alongside a single Dark Commune and a Sorcerer. Those were backed up by 1 10-model Cultist Mob and a Rhino. The Rhino was likely embarking 2 of the 3 units of Chaos chosen in the list, 2 of them with Chaos Undivided, one of them, interestingly, with Mark of Khorne. They were backed up with 2 Forge Fiends, 1 Nurgle and 1 Undivided, to turn on Dark Obscuration and Profane Zeal, respectively, alongside 1 unit of 4 Obliterators, 2 units of Slaneshi Warp Talons, as well as 2 units of Nurglings and the Changeling to add a little bit of utility. There's also a 16-model Accursed Cultist Squad. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's what the Dark Commune goes into. This is sort of, I guess, an amalgamation of all of the different Chaos Space Marine archetypes that we're seeing. It's kind of a Chaos Space Marine good stuff list, I guess. We've got the Chosen Blobs with the Chaos Lords inside. We've got the Dark Commune and their Accursed Cultists to just soak in immense amounts of firepower and be a very dangerous frontline, alongside hugely powerful shooting from the Forge Fiends and the Obliterators backing all that up. Now, continuing to talk about Chaos Space Marines, we also saw a good result from Death Guard. Scott Toby went 5-0 at the V is for Volkite GT with a Death Guard army. This one was interesting, running only Mortarion as the character. Oftentimes we see Death Guard lists being packed full of characters with things like Biolegis Putrefires as well as Foul Blight Spawns to buff up their Plague Marine squads. But this list is eschewing that, probably to dodge Assassination, which is a very good secondary against Death Guard at the moment. We had one at Death Guard Rhino, 10 Plague Marines alongside a unit of 10 Cultists, 3 Fetid Bloat Drones, 2 units of 2 Mephitic Blight Haulers, 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, as well as 1 War Dog Brigand and a unit of Nurglings. Very much doing our best Chaos Knights kind of impression here with a lot of very light vehicles. These guys benefit greatly from the enhanced bonuses thanks to their new Contagion aura and can just spread around the table with a bunch of units that are pretty difficult to kill. If you don't end up taking out all of their many tiny vehicles, they'll start locking objectives in, beating you on primary, and just being generally obnoxious. And that moves us on to what is probably the most exciting result of the weekend. At the California Cup Major, which is a 100-player major over in San Diego, we saw Anthony Vanella take it down with World Eaters, going 9-0 with an absolutely ludicrous score. Anthony had no less than 6 100-point scores through his 9 rounds. That's impressive as hell, and with as aggressive as World Eaters can be, I can definitely see that someone who's good at playing primary objectives as well as playing the fight phase in order to maximize their ability to steal objectives away from you just with their sheer aggression, being very successful with this army. Anthony was playing Angron as well as Karn the Betrayer, Lord Invocatus, 1 Lord on a Juggernaut with the Favored of Khorne enhancement, alongside a Master of Executions with the Berserker Glaive for a ton of additional strength and attacks on the charge. We had 1 unit of 10 Jackals for a little bit of OBSEC, 2 units of Khorne Berserkers, 1 of 10 and 1 of 5, those guys being ferried to battle into World Eaters Rhinos, alongside a ton of 8-bound, 1 unit of 3 standard 8-bound, alongside 1 unit of 3 exalted 8-bound, and a big unit of 6 exalted 8-bound as well. Those guys can be pushed up the table with Scout from Lord Invocatus, then buffed with the speed buffs that World Eaters can unlock, especially once they start getting rerolls on Blessings of Khorne dice to unlock additional movement and advance and charge. Those guys can push across the table, potentially just alpha strike you right out if you're not prepared for it, and put a ton of pressure on your scoring. If you're not able to deal with those aggressive models and Angron, one of them is going to get to your lines, do a bunch of damage, and even if you deal with Angron early, he can potentially respawn later in the game, come back, and continue to do damage as the game continues. Super cool to see World Eaters doing well. They've been kind of by the wayside for a long time, given how powerful shooting is in this edition, but it certainly goes to show you that these armies can win in the hands of a good player. That moves us on to the other Chaos factions. We saw Chaos Demons go undefeated at the Other Realms Final Stand Grand Tournament. This one was won by Trevor Wiley, who was playing a very classic Monster Mash focused Demons army led by Be'lakor alongside a Lord of Change with the Everstave, Shalaxi Hellbane, Scarbrand, and the Blue Scribes. We then saw a bunch of utility units, including 2 units of 3 Flamers, 1 unit of 10 Blue Horrors, 2 units of 3 Nurglings, and a unit of Pink Horrors to shore up the backline and continuously score points. This is a very classic Chaos Demons build, very similar to the ones that we saw when the Index first came out, and it's nice to see it still putting up results. Now, last but certainly not least for Chaos factions, we also saw Chaos Knights go undefeated, where at the Atomic City Warzone, Lucas Troller took them to a 5-0 record. Now, I know there's going to be some comments in the comment section about how Chaos Knights are kind of locked into a War Dog heavy build, where they maybe take at maximum 1 of the big knights, and the rest of the list is focused on those War Dogs. And let me tell you, it is unfortunate that the army is kind of locked into that build, but it is undeniably very effective. Lucas was running a War Dog Stalker alongside 6 Brigands, 1 Huntsman, and 4 War Dog Carnivores, 3 units of Nurglings, and the Blue Scribes to add a little bit more utility and backline objective holding. These armies are straightforward, but they are brutal. The ability to move through terrain makes a vehicle-focused army much more effective in Chaos Knights than it would be in many other factions. And Chaos Knight War Dogs are probably one of the most effective combat vehicle profiles that 40k has to offer. And it's good that the faction has a very effective list archetype where some other factions don't even have that. Now, moving on from the Chaos Scourge, we'll move on to Space Marines and the classic Adeptus Astartes, where Mark Hurdle took down the Flame Flames of Autumn GT with an Ultramarines build. This list was a classic style of Gladius Task Force, running an Apothecary Biologus, a combi weapon lieutenant with Artificer armor, and Marneus Calgar, the great man himself. He was leading a big unit of 6 Boltstorm aggressors, and we saw Fire Discipline on the Apothecary Biologus to buff those guys up for insane damage in that whole wombo combo. We also saw a Blade Guard veteran squad, and so Marneus Calgar had the option to join either one of those heavy infantry bricks, alongside a Centurion Devastator squad with Grav cannons, 2 Inceptor squads with Assault Bolters, as well as 3 Land Raiders, 2 Redeemers, and 1 standard Godhammer pattern. On top of that, we had 1 Calidus Assassin for support, and that was the entirety of the list. 3 big bricks of infantry between the Centurion Devastators, the Blade Guard Veterans, and the Aggressors, supported by characters embarked in Land Raiders. Very, very straightforward. Moving on from that, we also saw Dark Angels go undefeated at the Mid-Mo Maelstrom, where Kyle Lamperez took an Ironstorm Spearhead. This one was rocking Azrael, as well as a Tech Marine with the target Augury Web to grant lethal hits, and a second Tech Marine with Master of Machine War to grant advance and shoot or fall back and shoot. The detachment loves getting additional command points to turn on things like Armor of Contempt to keep its tough dreadnoughts alive, as well as All Mercy's weakness in order to grant huge benefits to those vehicles. So Azrael generating additional CP is great, and he can jump into either of the infantry squads in the army in order to keep them alive with his invulnerable save. We then had 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts, 2 Gladiator Lancers, 2 Inceptor squads with Plasma Exterminators, as befits a noble knight of the Dark Angels, 1 Land Raider Redeemer for that big Assault Intercessor unit to hop into, alongside 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Interestingly, we were running Onslaught Gatling Cannons on these guys for a lot of additional horde clear. Can also trigger the Sustain from Mercy's weakness for additional chances to get devastating wounds on those things. Although if they are next to the target Augury Web, the Augury Web will not allow their lethal hits to transfer over into devastating wounds, obviously. Not exactly anti-synergy, but the Augury Web isn't quite as effective with devastating wound weapons as it would be with other weapons. That said, I do think the Onslaught Gatling Cannons are an excellent include on these Redemptor Dreadnoughts, especially alongside the Land Raider, Ballistus Dreadnoughts, and Gladiator Lancers that can kill heavier targets. The Redemptor Dreadnoughts having high volume weapons to deal with lighter targets is great. Now we have another Gladius Task Force list to talk about when we move over to Space Wolves, where Evan Stump took them to an undefeated X-0-1 record at the Lightly Salted GT, again tying in the finals with Chaos Space Marines. This is a Gladius Task Force list running an Apothecary Biologus, this time with Artificer armor, a Captain in Terminator armor, a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, and a Fire Discipline Terminator Battle Leader. These guys were hanging out with an Aggressor squad for that Apothecary Biologus to jump into. He still grants lethal hits to the unit, so that is still effective even if you're not using the entire Fire Discipline combo. 1 unit of 5 Fenrisian Wolves for support, 3 Gladiator Lancers for some backline shooting, 2 Inceptor squads, 1 with Assault Bolters and 1 with Plasma, 2 Scout squads for some forward deploy, a single Whirlwind to add indirect fire, as well as a Calidus Assassin for support. Last but certainly not least, we have a huge unit of Terminators. These are standard shooty Terminators with Power Fists, Storm Bolters, and Cyclone Missile Launchers, and that is where we are going to see that Wolfguard Battle Leader in Terminator armor jump into with Fire Discipline. He will still grant basically all the Fire Discipline combos to the unit. He himself grants lethal hits, being a Lieutenant equivalent. He can then turn on Fire Discipline to grant those lethal hits on a 5 if you are in Devastator Doctrine, and also be adding Sustained. If you get Storm of Fire, you can add +1 AP to all their weapons, all of which are getting lethal hits and Sustain on 5-ups. They're also benefiting the Cyclone Missile Launchers in the unit as well for some additional anti-tank damage. This brick is a lot more expensive than the Aggressor squad, but is undeniably extremely effective. Now, last but certainly not least, before we move off of the Space Marine factions, Black Templars also went 5-0 this week, with Josh Saltzman taking them to the BolterCon GT to an undefeated record. Josh was playing a Righteous Crusaders list, being led by High Marshal Helbrecht as well as Chaplain Grimaldus. We also had a Tech Marine with Witch Seeker bolts. This is a pretty nice upgrade for a character already rocking a 2 damage Forge Bolter. At a base level, it grants them precision and devastating wounds. They also get Anti-Psyker 4+, and full hit and wound rerolls with their ranged attacks if you have chosen Abhor the Witch, Destroy the Witch as your vow for the game. Even just getting a couple extra keywords on that Forge Bolter is pretty nice for the Tech Marine to be able to apply some additional damage from the backline. We're also seeing an Emperor's Champion in this list, a huge brick of Primaris Crusaders. I've talked about how powerful these guys are in a previous video. Go check that out if you want to know the damage of the 20 model Primaris Crusader brick, because it is absolutely insane. We also see some hefty use of jump pack assault intercessors as utility units and objective grabbers. These guys for 85 points, getting a power fist and a couple plasma pistols is a steal, especially given the fact that they do mortal wounds on the charge and synergize well with all of the Righteous Crusaders vow effects. We then see 2 Ballistus Dreadnoughts for backline shooting, a big Land Raider Redeemer to house 2 units of Primaris Sword Brethrens, as well as 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts to problem solve. And that moves us on to the Xenos factions, where we'll start talking about Necrons. Shane Phillips took Necrons to an undefeated X-0-1 record with 1 draw on it at the Hog Tower event. This list was running a Catan Shard of the Void Dragon alongside a Hexmark Destroyer with the Sovereign Coronal. He does have Lone Operative, so he can protect that aura of counting as being a leader, so granting +1 to hit and all your leadership synergies. A Lord with a Resurrection Orb alongside a Hyper Material Ablator Technomancer and a Sempiternal Weave Transcendent Catan. Going in on the Catan today. We're rocking 2 of those guys. That's pretty cool. The core of the list is a Canoptic Reanimator alongside a Tomb Sentinel with a Gloom Prism, a single Doomsday Arc, 1 unit of 3 Heavy Destroyers with Gauss Destructors, a big unit of 10 Lich Guard, where we're going to see that Lord, as well as the Hyper Material Ablator and Crypto Thralls jump into to make it super hard to kill, and last, but certainly not least, 2 Tombblade units in order to complete secondaries. The Tomb Sentinel is some new technology that Necrons have been adopting more recently. It is a good caddy for the Gloom Prism if you need it in matchups focused very heavily on psychic attacks, but it's also carrying around a D6 plus 1 shot, Strength 10, AP 2, potentially AP 3 if it's attacking enemies on objective markers 2 damage gun, and a pretty solid profile. Toughness 9 with 9 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save is pretty good, not to mention the fact that it's highly maneuverable with a 10-inch movement as well as deep strike. Moving back over to Atomic City Warzone, we saw Tau Empire also take one of the undefeated spots there, with Donald Plummer going 5-0 with his build. This list was a bit of a combined arms, including a lot of the best aspects of the Tau Codex. Some breacher teams, some heavy backline vehicles, as well as a hefty dose of battlesuits. The list was running a Cadre Fireblade alongside Commander Farsight, a Cold Star Commander with Exemplar of the Kauyan, as well as Longstrike. We then saw 2 breacher teams. Those both embarked into 2 Devilfish, 2 units of Crisis Battlesuits, 1 unit of 3 and 1 unit of 6, 1 unit of 3 with Fusion Blasters to make use of Commander Firesight's +1 to wound, and 1 unit of 6 to attach onto that Cold Star Commander, alongside 2 Hammerhead gunships to hang out with Longstrike, a unit of Kroot Hounds, 1 Pathfinder team, 2 Piranhas, and 3 Tetras for guidance. Pretty interesting to see Tau branch out into these builds that are focusing more heavily on the heavy guns in the faction. Units like Hammerhead gunships haven't been seen for a while, but I think that the threat of a lot of enemy long-range shooting, especially resilient long-range shooting from detachments like the Ironstorm Spearhead, and the resurgence of the Redemptor Dreadnought among Space Marine lists has made Tau players move away from focusing entirely on their Crisis Battlesuit teams to taking more heavy guns in order to answer those threats. Now, one of the other surprise results that we had from this weekend was Drukhari at 5-0, with Ridvan Martinez, Scary from over in the Scarcast YouTube channel, going 5-0 at the XPG GT. I imagine that Scary is going to talk about his games at that event over on his channel, so please go check him out if you haven't already. What he brought to the event, though, was a Beastmaster as his warlord, leading 3 units of Kabalite warriors alongside 2 units of 5 Racks. Those were embarked in a single Raider, as well as 3 Venoms to split some of those units up into smaller utility units. We saw 3 units of Mandrakes to act as utility, 1 Chronos to regenerate pain tokens, alongside 3 units of Scourges, all of them equipped with Dark Lances, and 3 individual Talos, all of them equipped with Haywire Blasters. This is a pretty classic composition of Drukhari. We're going to see those Kabalite warriors be able to split into smaller units thanks to the Venom, embark either the heavy weapons or the lighter units depending on what you need to protect inside the Venoms, and split the other half of the warrior squad off to either embark 2 units of 5 into the Raider or act as backline screening and support. We then see a lot of highly maneuverable anti-tank guns from the Scourges and the Talos as well. Those 6 Talos are able to deal massive damage to vehicles, specifically with the Devastating Wounds Haywire Blasters, and the Scourges are able to deep strike, fire their guns, and then return out of line of sight, meaning that they're very difficult to get to grips with if you don't have indirect fire yourself. Styles of lists like these are incredibly finesse-oriented to play, but especially if you get matchups into which the Dark Lance profile, or the Haywire Blaster in this case, is strong, you are going to blast them off the table very quickly. The amount of damage Drukhari can do is insane, even if their survivability is not. And at long last, that moves us on to the last list that we're going to be talking about today. My favorite buggy boys, Tyranids, and a return to form for the Tyranid faction. Gone are the days of Monster Mash Tyranids focused on nothing but Maleceptors and Exocrines. We're back to Genestealer spam. Ryan Verbeck took Tyranids to a 5-0 result at Mid-Mo Maelstrom, rocking a Vanguard Onslaught list that is directly out of my most fevered dreams. This one was running 3 Broodlords, alongside Death Leaper and a Neuro Tyrant to apply its enhanced Shadow in the Warp. We have 2 units of 10 Gargoyles, a Biovore to complete objectives, 2 Exocrines, as well as 30 Genestealers, 3 units of 10 to join those Broodlords into. These guys have a relatively fast base movement, can advance to charge thanks to Vanguard Onslaught, and have a long scout move, meaning that if you don't respect their threat range, they can alpha strike you directly off the table, alongside a mass number of lone operators to act alongside them or to force you to come deal with them and move into the Genestealer's threat range. They can represent a ton of midboard control, and with the devastating wounds granted from their Broodlords, they can still represent a lot of damage even into high toughness enemies. The downside of the Genestealers is they have lost their reroll wounds against enemies on objectives. They now just reroll 1s, which is a lot less effective, but still pretty scary. On top of that, we had 3 Lictors to, again, operate with the Genestealers or just hold down objectives and complete secondaries with impunity, thanks to their lone operative. 1 Maleceptor to act as a bit of a tough-to-kill bulwark, and 3 Neurolictors because they rule. This list is absolutely wild. The mass number of Genestealers can really wreck a lot of armies that aren't necessarily prepared for them. On top of that, their scout moves means that they can redeploy or take forward positions. Regardless of the matchup, they can really threaten your opponent on turn 1 if they don't deploy defensively, and they can react to the first turn roll-off, which is huge for an army like this. Not to mention the fact that they get all of the Vanguard Onslaught synergies, which makes them able to get lone operative, to reactive move in response to enemies, and just be difficult to pin down. This list is absolutely insane. I'm so glad to see it 5-0, and big congratulations to Ryan Verbeck for going undefeated at his event. And with that, those are all the lists this week. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite and how you're feeling about 40k right now and the insane diversity of factions and lists that we are seeing in the game currently. It's wild. This video is taking forever, but I'm excited to hear what you think. Thanks as well to the Standoff GT for sponsoring this video. Please go check them out. The link's down below in the video description and pinned comment. And if you want to watch some competitive 40k on this channel, I'm going to be streaming the Battle Brothers Major this coming weekend. I'm going to be traveling out to that one this week and streaming all 6 rounds of the event. Please come hang out with me on Saturday and Sunday. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. I love you all very much. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.